Woohoo! All right, so we'll get started here and whoa, we'll get started here. Whoops. All right, it's right. There we go. All right. Woohoo! Hey, y'all. So we'll get started here in about 3 minutes. And sorry, just making sure everybody knows animal care class is coming up really soon. Let me make sure we got our chat on. And whoops. Whoa. Computer is clearly possessed today. All right, we got folks on. That's awesome. So we'll get started here right at 6 o'clock. And if you're just joining us, feel free to put your questions in the chat. We've got an amazing lineup. This is the best collection of questions I've ever had. So, no, go ahead, put it on there because we got a full house, but you never know how fast I babble through it all. And, let us know who you are. I can see there's people here, but I can't always tell who they are or where they're from. So feel free to say hey and let us know who you are, where you're coming from, and all that. And we'll get started here. Man, I logged on a little later than usual, so we'll get started here in about 3 minutes. And we got an amazing set of questions to go. So thank you all for joining us on this lovely long weekend. I know we get folks from all over, so and Kristen, go ahead and type your question in there, and who knows, I might already have it on the list. I got so many questions. We got a ton of questions that got sent in today, so I'm excited about that. And some of them I don't think I've ever been asked, at least not on the open forum before. So we got all kinds of cool things we're going to talk about. With a little bit on energetics and detoxification, diabetes, autoimmune, allergies, all kinds of cool stuff. So if you're just joining us, I'm Bob, and we're going to get started here in just 5 minutes. And yeah, prostate hyperplasia letter. All right, yeah, okay, cool. Let me put that on the list. BPH, and so palmetto, and well, that's an odd one, but okay, cool. We will get to that as well. Parasites. Oh, that's a tough one without a doubt. All right. All right. You guys are going to make me work tonight. I love it. We got good questions, so we're going to get started here. Oh, man, we got 1 minute. All right. I better get myself organized here, huh? No, I was going to do one last check and make sure nobody emailed us at the last second. And looks like nope. All right, we're good. All right, I'm going to call it close enough to 6 o'clock. We got a minute left, but not really. Hey, Daniel, hope you're doing all right, man. You let me know later. Hopefully it was just indigestion. If you don't know it, I'm Bob Linde. I'm a registered herbalist with the American Herbalist Guild and an acupuncture physician here in Florida. And I'm the owner of Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies, where we have, I don't know, we've got a bunch of acupuncture physicians, a bunch of herbalists, and all kinds of other crazy stuff going on. Also, I'm the creator of the School of Herbal Studies, where we teach Western and Chinese herbal medicine, all the way from beginner all the way to clinical practice, where 3 nights a week we have student intern clinic here, supervised by me or one of our other senior herbalists. And we see everything and everybody who walks in the door. So it's in a way that people can still get care and not break the bank, because sometimes it is expensive to pursue alternative care. We've also got a plant nursery here. In case you can't see the sign behind us, we've got a big plant sale, kind of our end of summer, clearing out all of our excess inventory. Definitely, excuse me, marked a few things down. And I'll do a quick pitch for all of our classes coming up. Probably the biggest one is the herbal animal care. It's always a really popular one. And remember, all of our classes are both in person here in the classroom, but also online. We do them all live on Zoom, record them, and then give you access to those recordings, I think for like a year or something like that. But it's coming up September 29th and 30th. It's all weekend long, and you can register at traditionsherbschool.com. And we've got another one it's funny. It's one of those things where some schools teach physical assessment, others don't. But we've got Trisha is phenomenal, and I add all the herbal stuff into that. But that's coming up in October. That's another weekend intensive. It's physical assessment for the herbalist. And I hate to say it, in acupuncture school, I didn't get very good training in physical assessment. Doing all those various tests to see if there's a particular muscle, spinal problems, nerve problems, and so forth, that we can go through a series of tests to find that stuff out. And one that I know a lot of my students are really waiting with eager anticipation. We're doing a series of Thursday night classes. Again, these are all online and in person, but we're doing one night just kind of some basics of what is blood work and the CBC CMP kind of stuff. But then we're going to do the second evening is taught by Martina, one of the other acupuncturists here. It's kind of the traditional Chinese medicine, the energetics of blood work and how we can use that blood work to help understand what's going on. And then I think, at least I think, I'm teaching the third one, which is looking at it from a more functional standpoint. So functional medicine, it's not just how to, when you go and get blood work, they're like, oh, you're broken, here's a drug or here's some surgery, let's go to the ER. Functional medicine looks at like, how do we really just prevent disease, and even more importantly, how do we maximize our benefit and see where there is some potential issues, even when the blood work's not out of range. How do we spot some of that stuff? So I'll also say on Thursday nights, we usually have all kinds of cool classes going on. Those are open to, all the classes are open to everybody. But our Thursday night classes, you don't really need a lot of experience to get into those. But even those more experienced people will really enjoy doing a deep dive on a particular plant. We always make some sort of interesting medicine. And watch, I know we're working on next year's schedule. All of our teachers and staff have been putting in their requests for what they want to teach. And so Trish and I will be going through there trying to figure it all out. So, all right, enough of the commercial there. I'll get to the good stuff. I will say thank you all of you who emailed in some questions. We got some really great questions that came in. Sometimes I'm like, man, I hope somebody asks some questions online. I'm going to have to do a song and dance on some of these. But we'll be lucky to get through all of these tonight, and if we don't, we'll just push them forward to next month. And so if you don't know it, I started this during COVID because I missed yapping at all of the people. I've always done some free classes for the community, and so I decided to start utilizing things like Facebook. And even after we were able to start doing classes in person, I decided there was such a long reach that I was getting people far outside of Florida, and really touching people internationally, and really, I hope, giving a little bit better information than we can get off of TikTok, and doing my best to raise the bar and bring things up a little bit. Also, feel free, we've got a lot of YouTube videos. This will be uploaded onto YouTube tonight, tomorrow, certainly by Monday it'll be uploaded. Depends how busy I am the next few days with the plant sale that's tomorrow. But all of our past open forums are on the Traditions School of Herbal Studies YouTube page. You can also find out more about the school at traditionsherbschool.com. And if you're interested in seeing one of the great practitioners here, you can check out AcuHerbals, AcuHerbals.com. And also, I've got a podcast, Mastering Herbalism with Bob Linde, which I need to get better and do my next episode and get on it. So, and if you don't know, feel free to post any questions in there. I will do my very best to keep an eye there in the corner to see what comes up on the chat. And I usually do a good job of acknowledging it. If you don't hear me say something, type it in again or yell at me or something. I guess you guys can't yell at me. So thank you all for being here, and you'll have to ignore Angeline's going to come wandering back and forth every once in a while, and I know Mike's still out back in the garden there, that he's getting everything ready, so it's all perfect for tomorrow. And if you don't know, we're in St. Petersburg, Florida. And, I always encourage you, if you're ever in the area, especially if you're a practicing herbalist, one of the folks I usually don't see until I get to a conference or something, please do stop by the clinic. We have a half-acre teaching garden in the back and all kinds of cool tropical plants that most people don't get a chance to get exposed to. So I always encourage you to come by, grab a cup of tea, go hang out in the garden, especially after it cools off here in another month or so. Oh, and I almost forgot, tomorrow evening, if you are in the Tampa Bay area, our local Tampa Bay chapter of the American Herbalist Guild, our meeting is tomorrow night at 6, and we're venturing across the bridge. We're going to head south to the far end of Bradenton, and we're going to be visiting the Dragon Rises acupuncture school that's down there. And they've been in Gainesville for many, 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 many years. And that school was created by Leon Hammer, who's just an amazing herbalist who has his very unique style of pulse diagnosis. It's super cool. But we donated about $100 or so worth of herbs to the school, to the students there, so they could start a teaching garden down there. So we're going to do a little herb walk around their garden, see how it's doing, maybe pull a weed or two if we're really motivated. Probably not, it'll be hot. And then weather permitting, I'm going to, oh wow, nice. We're going to do a little herb walk around their parking lot because there's a bunch of both Chinese and local medicine that grows wild here, what we would call weeds. And then they're going to give us a tour inside the school a little bit and show us what their herbal apothecary looks like. Probably a lot like this, but I saw a video the other day. They got some really nice stuff, some fancy herb grinders, and a nice collection of medicine that they've been teaching their students to make. So I'm excited to see it. I saw it about a year ago as they were first getting set up to open. I was invited down there to do a little tour, and from what I can tell, it's really changed for the better. And I'm hoping that a lot of the new students, they just started on Monday, so I'm hoping they come and join us tomorrow. Dragon Rises in Bradenton, and at 6 p.m. So 6 to 8 p.m. Hopefully we're done. I'm sorry, I don't believe that's going to be online unless somebody gets really motivated. I'm not going to do it. So let me get started for real this time. So actually, one of my students in the Western program asked a wonderful question, and I may have mentioned it in the class some point, but I think it's a really wonderful question. It's like, what is the origin of energetics, of plants, food, people? Is it based on the constituents? Like, is there an alkaloid that we decide if that alkaloid's in there, it's a particular temperature or action? And for those of you who aren't familiar, some of you may be your first time here, I spend a lot of time talking about energetics because that's a concept that exists within every traditional culture. In Chinese medicine, we say things like yin and yang and qi, but we also say hot and cold. And Ayurvedic, when we start to look at doshas and all the constituents that go into the dosas and subdosas, doshas, like that's Pitta, Vata, Kapha. Those are all really looking at energetics of the individual, and then we say the herbs are good for a particular dosha or combination of doshas. But when we look at our, and certainly within the Greek medicine, Anani Tibbs, all of the native people, First Nation people throughout the Americas, and ultimately European medicine, we see this underlying theme that can really be broken down to a very simplistic idea. We think about the nature of disease, the nature of the herbs, and the nature of the individuals, either their constitution or their imbalances, based on whether they're hot or cold, wet or dry, deficient or excess, tense or lax. And that's going to become really important because some of the questions that people have asked later on, they're like, is this the right herb for me? And ultimately, maybe, maybe not, because why do herbs not work sometimes? It's because somebody didn't take the time to understand the energetics. And when we look at medical conditions like, we see on TikTok, this is good for diabetes, this is good for cancer, those are modern medical definitions of the way to describe a particular pattern of stuff. And so this is, when we talk about energetics, this is the way people used to look at things and understand the nature of disease in plants by an observational type of medicine. And it's so funny, we, my pleasure, Scotty. We all say, like, we catch a cold. what the heck does that mean? Like, usually you got a fever, not a cold, and yet we say we're catching a cold, or the cold caught us. When we say, oh, I don't want to sit under that AC vent, it bothers me, I don't like wind, that's actually a very strong concept that's throughout most traditional cultures. The idea that disease travels on the wind. Even though I believe in germ theory, I do believe in other things as well. So, how do we come up with this crazy talk, honestly? And there's a variety of different ways. When it comes to people, we talk about people being hot tempered, right? Or I'm just worn out. And so, hot tempered, guess what? That person's hot. And I'm exhausted. We've exhausted all of our energy, whether we call that chi or something else. Doesn't really matter what we call it. But I am out of a substance that should be in my body. I'm exhausted. I've exhausted all of that. And so much of this is just us looking at it, and how would we explain it in whatever language we speak. But then over time, and a lot of my energetics is originally coming from my study of Chinese medicine. That was my first introduction 25 years ago or so, to the idea of energetics. But then as I spent more and more time learning all of this stuff, seeing that it all existed in all the different traditions, I always say one of the books that really changed my perspective of herbalism is herbalism. I don't care what labels, whether we call it Western, Chinese, Ayurvedic, First Nations, whatever. Energetics of Western herbalism it's a 2-volume set by Peter Holmes. And you can find that on the school website, by the way, under resources. But he did his first book, maybe the first third or so, was a comparison and contrast of all the different systems. And he came to the same conclusion and it really was enlightening to me, that the idea is it's all just different funny words describing the same stuff. And it really does start to lend to some of the problems we see, because when we describe, and one of the questions later on is about inflammation. And technically, when we look at inflammation, if you've ever taken a pathology class, that you need swelling, pain, loss of function, and redness. Now, of course, that only works on Caucasian people, but whatever. But the redness is one of these requirements, and yet if it's red, we would say it's hot. And so we would put something cold on there. It might be ice, it might be a cold plant, it might be a wet cloth. But lots of inflammatory diseases aren't red. Lots of inflammatory diseases are affected by weather. Some are swollen, some aren't. Some are really pale and want heat. So there is something beyond these very simplistic, and not to say Western medicine is simplistic, but in a way, some concepts of it are kind of narrow and simplistic. And so recognizing this nuance of why do drugs sometimes not work? And so that comes down to this concept of energetics, and it's a trick. I will say that everybody in acupuncture school, in order to pass your herbal boards or all your acupuncture boards, all of them, you had better memorize all the energetic stuff. But the reality is, a lot of folks don't actually practice it after they get out of school. They just treat knee pain or whatever, and they just put the pokey things in the owie place, and they miss so much by sitting there and looking at this nuance that is energetics. And so I'm going to say that the way they figured it out on people was just looking and spending a lot of time thinking about it. And most of our medicine, just like so many of our stories of creation and so forth, are a oral tradition where they're passing down these ideas. So if you have an entire life dedicated to medicine in some form, that 1,000 years ago, and you start to observe things and you teach your apprentice, like, hey, I've seen these things and this is what I do for it and this is what it means in the way I understand it, and then you do that for 10,000 years, all of a sudden we have this very cohesive thing. And I like Chinese medicine because the Chinese were smart enough to keep the Europeans out. And so we saw the expansion of European culture. They were not allowed into China except for those 3 ports for trade on the Yangtze River. I don't know, I think I learned that in elementary school. And it wasn't until the late 1800s that there was some warring and stuff going on, but the reality is, outside of their own internal turmoil, China's cultural traditions have not changed a lot. Certainly communism was probably the most dramatic change that happened to China, but we can still find the textbooks that are 2,000 and 3,000 years old, the Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's Internal Classic, that is still the way we practice. And so when we look at India, the English went in there and they basically trashed the joint. And so a lot of that culture was changed. And even now in China, as we see the influence of the West on Chinese culture, they're doing less energetics and more Western medicine. That we see very little of energetics in the herbalists and acupuncturists that are coming from there. So, all right, that's enough about the people. That one's pretty, comprehensible. There's like, as we pay attention, we try to explain what we see. And I like religion. How is that created? People try to understand these bigger ideas. And so not only were they looking at the heavens to try to explain what they saw, trying to understand the creation of all the things that we see and experience, they were also looking at the microcosm of like, how do I understand myself and the things that I experience, and why does the person next to me experience them different from me? And so I think there's a lot of questioning that goes on more in the past, before the internet, before TV, before even the radio, that had people come up to conclusions, and sometimes they were wrong. Both the Chinese were sometimes wrong, sometimes the European systems were wrong, and it's what stands the test of time and that is repeatable observational science. And that's really how we refine all of this down to what we see. And I'll say that, like, I've been doing this formally full-time for over 25 years now, and I've created some things that I believe to be true, uniquely so in the pulse and the tongue diagnosis, that's a part of a lot of cultural traditions. And they're what I jokingly call Bobisms. And I can't find them in the book, and in one case they're in conflict with what traditional Chinese medicine would say about the tongue diagnosis. And the nice thing is my students are able to repeat it, that they see it even when I'm not there. And so to me, that creates what I would say is a truism that will then hopefully go on and expand the way some people think about things. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do. The longer you do something, the harder it is to still stay, well, okay, I think it's easy to stay excited, but curious, to still ask questions, to try to explain what I see if it doesn't perfectly match up with what I believe to be true. And so I don't know whether that's a sanity issue on my part or not. I don't know, but I continue to explore and question it. So let's get back to the plants. And food and plants, I'm going to say, is the same. And it's not based on a constituent. It's not like, ooh, if this alkaloid is in there, we can say that. Although there's plenty of times we can do that. If we have an oily seed, we can say that it's probably moistening and it's going to loosen your bowel. I think anybody who's ever eaten too many seeds or nuts or too many fruits would experience that at some point. So that one's more experiential. And I would say that most of it is, how does it feel in our mouth? How do we experience in our body? And if you not sure what I'm saying, it's summertime. It's summertime for probably most of the people in the northern hemisphere that are listening to this, although I've had a few people from Ecuador on here on the other side of the equator. That's why it's called Ecuador. And in the summertime, it's hot. And what grows? Watermelon. Nothing tastes as good as watermelon in the summertime. It's cold, refreshing, and so it's moistening, nourishing, and I would actually argue it's cold. And I think all of us can say that, oh yeah, I feel that cooling. And it's not that it came out of the refrigerator. Literally, you could break it open in the middle of the field, stick your hand in there, scoop it up, and start eating it, and it would cool off everything that it touches. And you can still buy watermelon in the winter time, but if it's 32 degrees out and you start eating a lot of watermelon, I think you're going to probably not enjoy it. It's not going to feel good, and if you eat too much, it actually hurts your belly. We tend to say, again, traditional cultural, the stomach needs to be warm, and if we put out the digestive fire, the Agni in Ayurveda, the stomach chi or the stomach fire in Chinese, then we end up with loose stools, we end up with vomiting, diarrhea, all these kinds of things that can happen if we put out that fire, and undigested food becomes part of our norm. And so, in the same sense that that would be cold, if you've ever had ginger tea, that feels very warm. And if we stick a thermometer, whether we put it in the watermelon, we stick it in the ginger, the temperature is whatever your air temperature is. But its actions in our body makes us feel warm. And that's such a unique thing, that we can warm our body and feel warm from room temperature water. Like, if we drink water, it feels this way. We had ginger tea, same temperature water now, it makes our body feel different. If we do marshmallow, or watermelon juice for that matter, because yum, those things can make us feel moistening, those can make us feel cool. And so part of that is how it feels. The other thing is we can start to make some general assumptions, and they're not 100%. We still got to put our experience in there. And I'm going to come back to that idea of experience too, because that's now I'm going to just confuse the crap out of all y'all with it. If you're not already, the flavor bitter is generally cold. The flavor sweet is usually nourishing. Think a carrot, think burdock. The flavor acrid is diaphoretic. The flavor sour holds things in. I feel like I've missed one. Bland is generally diuretic, i.e. makes you pee, gets water out. Sour, bitter, okay, I think I got all the good ones there. Umami is usually considered nourishing, but that doesn't really show up on our charts, don't know why. So flavor and experience are the two primary ways that we come up with energetics. I will say, uniquely to the Chinese, we do some weird stuff, and there's things when we look at certain animal meats, like I don't understand. I was like, I don't know how y'all got that. Like, why is pigeon not as warm as a... Okay, I've never eaten an eagle, and nor will I ever, but that's the only thing I can think of, because it'll make sense to in a second here. Here we go. How is a pigeon warmer than a turkey? I was like, I don't notice a difference. And so I actually had a Chinese guy tell me once, the idea that the higher up an animal flies, the hotter it is, the lower to the ground it is. The deeper in the water a fish goes, the colder it is. The closer to the surface, the warmer it is. And for things that don't swim or fly, the higher it jumps, or the farther that it jumps, will determine its hot or coldness. And the reality is, when you sit there and look at what's been written about energetics, I was like, it kind of works. It's not perfect, but it kind of works. And I would say I would put your experience over that, again, very general idea. And there's some other general things we can say in there. The deeper a root goes, the more likely it is to be nourishing and mineralizing. Doctrine of signatures, the idea if something looks like something, it might be good for it. And so, funny, so cucumber and mints, and by the way, this is a great way for those of you who are formulators, you're making your own teas and stuff. So Liza just did this with, she was like, oh, fruit or cucumbers with mint. So you have something that's cold, a cucumber, right? We put that on our eyes for anti-inflammatory and stuff like that. It's very moistening and can feel very heavy for somebody, and fruit can feel really heavy for somebody with cold digestion. So she likes it with mint. And so that is a very classic mint with watermelon, mint with cucumbers. Those are very classical combinations. So we have something that's heavy and cold and wet that weighs us down. And mint is light, bright, warm, and is a diaphoretic and helps the digestion. So the combination of those two energetically, and ultimately it tastes good, but a lot of times we can create new flavors by blending our things in. And when we formulate, getting ahead of myself, we can make food recommendations, or we think about our herbs, if we know they're energetics, we can say, oh, you need to eat more bitter foods. You need to eat more acrid foods. And that can actually be easier sometimes, not always, because it's very vague. Eat more bitter foods. The sky is the limit. You just got to decide what's bitter. Eat less sweet foods. Eat less salty foods. Oh, I didn't say salty. Salty is usually diuretic. Sorry, I missed one. Ha! I knew I was forgetting something. So plants, foods. So here's where it gets interesting. Most of the books and most of the herbalists, we disagree with each other. Chinese, Ayurvedic, Western, we argue about this all day. I forget it was David Winston or Rosemary Gladstar once said, put 5 herbalists in the room, ask them a question, you'll get 6 opinions. And that's so freaking true, it's ridiculous. And the reality is, guess what? I live in Florida. It's hot right now. It's hot and humid out there. It never gets particularly cold. And for us, the winter is dry, but for somebody who lives in a mountain in Colorado, it's not dry. So the way I might experience, like I think stinging nettle is the single best plant on the planet for everyone who lives in Florida. It's hot, it's humid, there's a lot of mold and mildew, we all got allergies, like, and so we should be drinking that because it's very drying energetically. It helps to reduce the histamines in the body. Very nourishing, and so we're all summer long. We're just sweating to death. I went through about 10 buckets of sweat out there working in the garden today, getting ready for the plant sale. And so, for me, nettles is magic. I'd give it to just about everybody. Not everybody, but just about. And you talk to somebody like Paul Bergner, who used to live in Colorado in the mountains there, and he would talk about how dry, and you could never give this to a deficient dry person. It would just cause all of these problems and constipation. And so his experience with this herb based on his environment is the polar opposite of mine. We also have to recognize that, guess what? I'm not perfect. I am out of balance, and that's kind of how I got here. I'll spare you all that story tonight. But the reality is each one of us is slightly out of balance, or some of us are greatly out of balance, depending on where we are in the world. Some people are on medications. And so if I'm the one experiencing the herb, I'm doing it based on my energetics. And so what I express as being hot or cold, wet or dry, is being interpreted through my senses. So somebody with a different imbalance will experience it differently. And so I'm trying to think of a good example for that. Marshmallow. Marshmallow, for me, I don't like it. It's very mucilaginous. It's moistening. And I'm full of phlegm. I don't need extra moisture. I love dry things. I want all the drying herbs. Those make me feel really good. And so I'm very hesitant to use the marshmallow overall because I'm interpreting it through my own lens. Where somebody who's really dry, really hot, has lung issues that are really dry and hot, they're like, this is candy. Everybody should be having some marshmallow. So it's really important sometimes to recognize where an herbalist lives, what their imbalances are. By the way, that's a good reason to go to conferences. American Herbalist Guild Conference is right around the bend. Early October in Asheville. Everybody should go. It's a super fun thing. It's for every level of herbalist, and that is your professional organization. Please support them. And also, I know the location. It's a wonderful location. Lots of formal and informal herb walks, I'm sure, will be going on there. So I hope some of y'all are going there. I know I think we got like 10, 15 people coming just from Tampa Bay here, so I'm super excited about that. Um, so I don't know if I answered that question, but I think it is important that, for my students, I make them all, they hate me for it, but I make them taste all of the, oh, yay. Oh, yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. The AHG conference, they do have hey, Stevie, they do have an online version for people who aren't able to travel, and I think it's fairly inexpensive too. So thank you for that reminder, Jacqueline. Um, so the reality is we all have to taste all these nasty herbs and come to our own conclusions. And it's tough in class because I'll throw 20 herbs at them in a day, and they're like, "Oh my God, stop trying to poison us." So it's hard to interpret all of those flavors. But ultimately, as you're exposed, you learn about a new herb, and you're like, "Wow, this sounds really exciting. I wonder if this is right for me." Make some tea out of it and make it really strong. And for me, I like to do it on an empty stomach when I've been well rested and not in a hurry or anything. And I'm just like, I'll just take the smallest amount. Sometimes I'll take a little bit of the dried herb or fresh herb if I have it and taste it first, but then I'll drink a little of the infusion, the tea, and I'll just like sit there and tune into my body. And it's always interesting. A lot of times you can literally feel that herb enter your body and move to a particular location in your body. And I know that's a hard question that's on there later on because we talk about directionality of herbs or affinities of herbs to particular organs. And admittedly, I've been doing this a long time, so I'm made fun of for my hypersensitivity. But I can usually really feel where an herb goes. Not always, but usually. Especially the warm herbs. The warm herbs I find very easy, and the cold herbs I'll just go right to my stomach, and I hate them. I tend to be cold and wet, unfortunately. All right, got through that one. Oh, as long as we're on it, I'm just going to keep going. Sorry, I'm just, these were just really good questions. So, when we talk about organ affinities, there's more than one way to associate an herb with an organ. And one way is through the herb's taste. So we say that sweet tends to help the digestion. We say that, and it's so funny, bland and acrid, and so we almost have two flavors for the lungs. And one is the bland is more about nourishing and strengthening the lung, where acrid is if your lung is damaged, but both kind of go to the lungs. Then we've got salty affects the kidneys, or guides to the kidneys. When we talk about the liver, the Chinese will say sour affects the liver and bitter affects the heart. The Western herbalists tend to say bitter is more about the liver, and sour they don't always associate with an organ. And I would say I like the Chinese approach because the bitter does affect the heart, but I'm going to say it also affects the liver. And so the Chinese herbalists always cheat. They'll say it enters the heart and the liver, and so pretty much every bitter herb does both. And so it's like that's okay. So sour tends to guide and affect the liver and gallbladder. We can use both digestive bitters as a way to stimulate bile secretions, but sour also seems to have an effect on generating fluids. It seems to help to stimulate liver function, and so we're going to cheat and go with liver and sour, good for both of those organs. We can also use something called doctrine of signatures, and doctrine of signatures is this concept if something looks like something, it's good for it. I'm trying to think of a good, kava is a good example. It's a very heart-shaped leaf. And so although your heart doesn't look like that, it's close enough. That's how when we draw a heart, and we see this in many cultures, the heart is frequently driven, it is written that same way. And so the kava leaf is very much shaped like this, and it's really good for anxiety. And that's a particular emotion that we tend to associate with the heart. Because anxiety, what happens? The heart starts beating really hard. That's different from the liver, right? The liver doesn't have the heart beating, so we see a symptom affect the physical organ or what we believe to be the organ. We have other things like, no, that'll confuse people. Never mind, I won't say that one. So that's the specific organ affinities. We can look at the taste, we can look at the action, where we see a particular herb seems to affect it, like something like, well, I'll go back to kava. Even if we didn't know what the plant looked like, we know it calms down our anxiety. We can look at skullcap, has nothing to do with the plant shape, but that's really nice for acute anxiety. So we can say that affects the heart, and I would argue the liver too, but that's more based on it helps with anxiety and irritability a lot of times. The directionality, again, is harder, and there's a couple of different ways to think about the going up or down. There is, again, we see its effect if something like Creeping Charlie, ground diving. And it's probably, I'm going to end up going to jail for it. I've introduced it to Florida. It seems to go very well here, like it does everywhere on the planet. But Creeping Charlie, we say, is good for phlegm in the head, and particularly good here. It has other properties as well. And so how does it just work in the head? Would it affect other parts of the body? And it might, but it has an affinity to the head itself. And there's no particular reason for it. It's not a doctrine of signatures that I know of, although I see the plant growing. It's more one of those things that when we take it, we experience it, and we don't experience it in other places. We can also see things that are purgative. Oftentimes, we might say has an affinity to the bowels because they're cleaning them out. So when we say up or down, we tend to see that more through our experiential aspect of it. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. And then the acrid plants are oftentimes herbs that make us break a sweat. Diaphoresis, in Chinese medicine we call it release exterior. And so that idea of pushing things out of the body. Somebody's asked about parasites some, and that may come out. We're going to push things out of the body in the other direction. Instead of out this way, we're going to push it. Purging the bowels would be something we would be looking at with all of that. All right. And so I taught a whole class on this at AHG a couple of years ago. So we pair plants together in order to make them work better. And I'm going to say, like the Chinese, we have a cool name for it, Duiyao, where we say two plants put together create new or better or more focused actions. And so there's any number of different ways we can pair, reasons why we pair plants together. Western herbalists don't have a cool name for it, but they've been doing it for as long as there's been Western herbalists. And so we see combinations like dandelion and burdock, cleavers and chickweed. Of course, that's all I can think of at this second. Calendula with plantain or comfrey, depending on what you're trying to do. Arnica and comfrey used topically. So there's this whole slew of things that it becomes a normal part of what we do. Yarrow and elderberry and chamomile and, all those combinations, chamomile and ginger, cardamom and ginger. And we do it in cooking too, salt and pepper. The carrots, oh my God, what is it? Mirepoix. It's the French combination. I can't think of it. Ginger and onions and garlic. So we do this pairing to enhance flavors, to bring out new flavors, and so forth. And I wish there was, for real, that's on my list of books I need to write. I have a list of, I think I'm up to 10 or 12 books I need to like stop everything and just write for a bit. Um, because a lot of people talk about it, but until we write it down and try to explain ourselves and look at the nuance, a lot of times it is forgotten. So again, this comes down to our experience with these plants. And what's fun is we can create new experiences. And I think if we talk to any herbalist, they have their favorite plants that they like to combine together. So for those of you who know me and been to classes, you know I love Biden's alba, that's Spanish needle, and Seta cordifolia, or Seta spa, any species of Seta. The two of those work so synergistically well together. Although I use both of them separately, I love an opportunity to put those two plants together. And there's other things, but I'm like, where some people are like, nettles cures everything. We have jokes about it. Holy basil, Tulsi cures everything. Everybody needs it. That's true. For me, if you've ever been to clinic here, it's like Biden's cures everything. Everybody needs more Biden's. Not the president, the plant, Biden's alba. Two-toothed white flower. That's Vidence, and alba is that. All right, man, that was a rough one. I got through all of that. The fact that I did that in 35 minutes is a miracle. All right, where do I want to go next? Actually, you know what? Because it's from somebody else, but I think the question fits into what we're talking about here. And by the way, for any of you who are, it's like, I always forget to say this, any of you who are just jumping on here, you can find all the gibberish I already said on YouTube in a couple of days. I always post it on Tradition School of Herbal Studies YouTube page. And if you've got any questions you want to toss in, put them in the chat. I'm trying to keep half an eye on it. So this was a question somebody else came up with, and again, I don't remember whether I've actually talked about dosage. So how much herbs and tea do you need for it to actually do something? And all of these questions, by the way, are huge questions I could take an entire weekend to expound on. And so the question of dosage, there are many schools of thought. And even if we just go as a cultural tradition, how might we say a particular plant? What dosage would we use? And so part of it is, and I'm generically going to say, for an acute disease, you treat it with higher dosage and higher frequency. For a chronic disease, you do a lower dosage and maybe only 1, 2, or 3 times a day. And so I always say low and slow for the chronic conditions. And we're going to do hard and fast for the acute ones. But when we look at dosage, it gets really interesting. I always say, like, generically across the board, most herbs fall in the dosage of anywhere from 3 to 10 grams per dose, and a rounded teaspoon to a rounded tablespoon per cup of water. Some people would say that's per 2 cups, but that's it. Like, it's opinions, and that's fine. But the reality is, when we look at things like homeopathy, where there is no plant matter in there, it's literally the vibrational signature into the water, which I'm not even sure what I just said, and yet I also have experienced how well it works when you get it right. So we can literally use an atomic shadow and have benefits. When we look at, and I would say Western herbal medicine and kind of that wise woman, not even that home herbalist, where I'm just giving some chamomile tea to my kid at night, tends to be very low dosage. Even when we look at tinctures, if you actually think about the math behind a tincture, that's a very, very small amount. When we're doing just 1 to 3 droppers, that's probably the equivalent of about 3 grams, maybe. Just depends on how the tincture, what ratios, blah, blah, blah. But then when we go all the way up to Chinese herbs, there's things where we have 50 grams of one herb, and we might put 10 herbs into a formula, not all of them that high. And then we'd say drink that all day long. Like you have to drink that 100 grams worth of herbs in your day. And so ridiculously high dosage. Guess what? All of them work. And there's 1,000 experiences and traditions anywhere in there. But as a general rule, I said, for acute versus chronic conditions, we change our dosage. For the size of the organism, we change our dosage as well, to a point. So an average adult human, between 120, 150 pounds, although, people are getting larger as we go, is usually when somebody says, oh, here's the dosage, it's an adult dosage of average constitution. They're not too screwed up in any particular direction. They're not on 1,000 medications. And as the organism gets smaller, we give them lower dosage. So if we say your average human is 120 pounds, I do that because the math is easier. If somebody was 60 pounds, then we'd give them half the dosage. If somebody was 30 pounds, we'd give them 25% of the dosage. And we can go on down. And this works for humans. This works for dogs. It kind of works for cats, but you have to be more careful. It doesn't work for horses. So as we get up to the cud chewers, the herbivores, we usually kind of go in the opposite direction. So you figure a horse might be 1,000 pounds. That means we would have to do 10 times the dosage. Usually for like every 100 pounds, we go up maybe 20%. So, and that's for other four-leggeds, not two-leggeds. We don't necessarily go up to that. So literally, we don't do like 100 pounds of herbs for a horse for an average dosage. We see the same thing in formulations. If we look at homeopathics, there's two schools of thought. One where they'll blend homeopathics together. We see that in flower essences, which are homeopathic plant medicines that are designed for spiritual, emotional, behavioral kinds of changes rather than specific energetics. So they keep it very small any way you slice it. Then we've got Western herbalists who usually you're going to keep it under 9 herbs. You've got the Chinese who will sometimes go up to 15 or 20 herbs, or it's really rare to go over 12 herbs. Ayurvedic medicine will put 30 herbs in a heartbeat. I know some Ayurvedic practitioners from India, and I was just like, I don't even know what this is doing anymore. And again, all of them work. So you some of it's going to depend on your experience, some of it's going to depend on your teachers and what tradition you follow as you go through that, and if you're studying a particular type of herbal medicine, and there are many. And so dosing is always an interesting thing. So if your herbs are matched to your constitution or the energetics of your disorder, I don't actually think you need that much herbs. I think a rounded teaspoon, based on how acute a particular issue, is plenty. And I'll give you an example. Chinese herbal formulas, they make them in pills. It's super convenient, classical formulas. So yay, it makes my job easy sometimes. And they have hundreds of different formulas that are already made into pills based on a particular imbalance. And if you talk to most acupuncturists, they're like, you have to double or triple the bottle dosage. And I'm like, yeah, I don't see that. If we match the formula to the individual, I usually use half the bottle dosage and get positive effects fairly quickly. And so it's about proper diagnosis and proper application and creation of a formula or application of those. And most of us, I'm beaten up on TikTok, validly so. Most people learn, and I did too. When I first started learning this stuff when I was a teenager, it was this herb is good for that. And it was one herb for one disease. And the reality is that's not how herbalism is used most of the time. Occasionally it is, but rarely. And so usually it's looking at all the symptoms, the whole person, everything from sleep to poop to eating habits to their tongue to their pulse, and all of these things together forms this picture of who they are, this myriad of too much and not enough. And then we create formulas, we put different herbs together to match this pattern. And when that happens, it's usually we can have some profound changes. And nobody asked the question, but it's the obvious question: how long does it take? And generically, and I do say generically because every case is different, a month for every year you've had a disorder. And so if we just go on that premise, when somebody's had a disease for 10 years, which is really normal, we're always the last choice people have. And so it could take 10 months. It doesn't mean you won't see any progress in 10 months. What it means, though, is if you make the lifestyle and dietary changes, like if you keep going through the drive-through at Mickey D's, you're not going to get better that fast. But you're like, no, I'm trying. I'm getting 80% of the things you said that would be beneficial, and I'm moving, and I'm taking the herbs, even though they taste gross. And you're like, oh no, you're going to see this progression of change. And we may be getting close to as good as we're going to get in those 10 months. It's very normal. We don't take the same formula for that 10 months either, because the assumption is that we're making some of the imbalances better. And so that's why people do follow-ups. It's not like, here, take this and it will forever cure you. No medicine works that way. A good doctor would reevaluate you after he put you on a prescription medication and check your blood work, see how it was working for your symptoms, and then either give you a different drug or change the dosing. That's the same way herbalists work. We're making our best guess. We're creating for what we see today. Then we follow up in a couple of weeks and say, like, how you doing? We expected to see some change. All right, too much of that, not enough of that. So we change, we add, and we see and support you as you try to make lifestyle changes and things like that. So it's important that we have realistic ideas. The herbs are not, well, I shouldn't say that. Herbs were drugs up until the 1920s, and drugs are not herbs. And so the reality is, it drives me nuts when I see things like, Ozempic, the weight loss, diabetes, blah, blah, blah. And so berberine, which by the way is not a plant, it's an alkaloid. Berberine is a alkaloid that is contained in many plants, but everybody on the internet seems to not know that. And so they're saying like berberine is the same as Ozempic. It is not. It is not even close. Berberine's way safer, but it also doesn't work that way. It does not dramatically drop weight or blood pressure or anything else. Well, it can drop your blood pressure. It may affect your blood sugar. And if you're not monitoring your blood sugar or you're taking it inconsistently, you can run into problems. So it's really important we recognize it's not you're on this med, we'll just take this herb. That is fraught with so many dangerous pitfalls. It's not even funny. It is a process to work with an herbalist. And I've said this before. I think David Winston was, what's up, Samaya? I think David Winston was quoting one of his teachers back in the day, but I'm going to say I got it from David Winston. That ever since the 70s, herbs became really popular, but herbalists still aren't. And that's the wrong way to do it. Herbs are a lifelong study and require a lot of effort to treat the more complex disorders. You get a cold or flu or an upset tummy, now have some chamomile, you'll be fine. And it works great. And it's, I won't call it free, but it's cheap. Depends where you live, whether it's free or not. But when we start to look at complex things, that's the same way you wouldn't want to walk at people walking into the pharmacy and go, I want some Librium, I want a few Oxy, let me get a couple of those antibiotics over there. That would be insane. And so herbs are powerful. Like, in case you can't tell, there's a few herbs behind me. And they have effects, and if they have effects, they're going to have side effects. And so there's no one size fits all, and therein lies the dilemma of TikTok, because TikTok doesn't say that. All right, where do I go from here? What do I want to do? let's talk about autoimmune. Actually, one of the there was a couple of questions that somebody had. They were specifically talking about autoimmune disorders, and they named allergies and a couple of other diseases. And they asked the right question, actually. It wasn't like what herb is good for autoimmune disorders. What they said was, what are the root cause of autoimmune disorders? And that's always the best question a person could ask. And the reality is there's no single answer. And so they asked, are parasites the root cause of autoimmune disorders? Here's one that's going to mess with your minds. There's one particular parasite that will actually cure your autoimmune disorders. Actually, hookworms, a horrible. There's actually a whole illegal trade in hookworms being sent through the mail. People do hookworm travel to Africa where it's very common, and will literally go walk through a farmer's field so that they get hookworm infection in their feet to cure their autoimmune disorders. Please don't do that. There's many bad side effects of that as well. So it's odd. That said, other parasites can cause, I won't say autoimmune, but immune issues. One of the things that we see is on your blood work, if you have intestinal parasites specifically, there's other types of parasites as well that I don't believe show up on this. There's one test in your CBC, that's your complete blood count. When you go to the doctor for your annual test, they're like, oh, let's just do this general screening, that's CBC and a CMP, a complete metabolic panel. And in that CBC is something called eosinophils, EOS. And so it's abbreviated on your stuff, EOS. And so if it is high out of range, and I'm going to say the higher it is, it implies you could have parasites. It doesn't guarantee it. What it means is, you should see whether you have severe allergies or parasites are the two most common things. And so that's probably you have intestinal parasites. And I believe the scale goes up to 6, 0 to 6. So if you get a 12, it's yeah, I'm going to start asking you questions about parasites, without a doubt. Depending on who you ask, it's the most underdiagnosed or overdiagnosed disease. But what I would say is this is kind of a Facebook, TikTok special. They list this ridiculously long list of possible symptoms that may be caused by parasites. And in many countries, parasites, you live in South America in a rural area, if you're drinking river water in any place that's unpurified, dang, 20 plus, I would look at allergies and parasites both. I would explore both venues. But then, almost guarantee you do. If you're on the all sushi diet, you probably got some parasites. But the reality is, at least in the United States, the bulk of people live in cities. And not to say our water's great, but we do have clean water, cleaner than most places. And although it may have other yucky things, generally not parasites. And if you cook your food, you're less likely to have parasites. That's the joy of the invention of fire, was that we started to kill things like parasites, because food poisoning is a common problem. That's crazy, Samaya. That person needs a poop test. So when somebody comes in and says they have parasites, I go, why do you think you have parasites? And for intestinal parasites, we look for symptoms. The most common symptom of intestinal parasites is an itchy butt. You can also see parasites in your stools. They'll be either like grains of rice that move. That's usually pinworms. You might see little threads that are actually moving and swimming around. You might see some segments that are usually a white or grayish color that kind of look like little, anywhere from 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch little segmentations. They may or may not move. But if you don't have those, but you're like, no, I have parasites, I encourage people to go and get a stool test, a poop sample, and get it analyzed and look for it. So If you have pets, especially if your pets spend a lot of time outside, like if you have a dog that's in the yard, or you go to the dog parks, or a cat that's an indoor-outdoor cat, you might have parasites. Little kids get parasites a lot. Usually pinworms are the most common, but sometimes other ones. They're in the sandbox, and the cat likes the sandbox. Kid likes uh, the the sandbox, and so kid eats dirt and poop and things like that. So we sometimes find pinworms in little kids, and they're both dogs, cats, and small children drag their butt on the ground. I'll demonstrate it when you're in class someday. I'm not going to do that on camera. And that's a clear sign that you have parasites. Other parasites, like there are liver and blood-borne parasites that are harder to detect, but they usually come with symptoms such as liver inflammation. The blood can be analyzed, and the blood will show up if, again, we look for exposure. So pets are a valid exposure. Time in the woods, because when we think about like Lyme disease, that's a parasite, and it comes from a tick, and it injects little squirrely things into us. When we look at malaria, that's a type of blood-borne parasite. So the Campylobacter, I know I've worked on that one. I believe that's an intestinal parasite, but I won't swear to that. There's a couple of weird parasites that kind of encapsulate into your bowels and are a real pain in the ass, literally. But again, can be detected through a poop sample. And so one of the things that we look at, and sorry, I'm just going to keep going with parasites. We'll come back to autoimmune disorders. Some parasites can cause what appears to be an autoimmune disorders, others don't. But when we look at parasites, and there's a bunch of questions about how do we do a parasite cleanse. Parasites are hard to kill, both in Western medicine and herbal medicine. And I know everybody says black walnut and all the other usual stuff, wormwood and so forth, and that's fine. But the reality is, if we don't know what the type of parasite is, if we don't know what its life cycle is, then you might kill the adult, but then the eggs are partying down. If we don't know how it's spread and we're not cleaning everything in our house, then we're just going to be reinfected. And so it's so important. Like, Western medicine isn't bad. I know this is all about herbs, but the reality is Western medicine has some really good tests, and they can do blood tests, and they can do poop tests, and they can identify a parasite. And they're I don't think they're as common as the internet would tell us, but it's a good way to sell product. But they're not rare. I'll also say it's not infallible, the tests that they do. And there's a lot of traditional cultures, and some of the things like black walnut and all of that are based on some traditional cultures, but a lot of it's just modern stuff. I probably twice a year I get contacted from somebody from South America who, they got a lot of parasites, right? They're all drinking river water and things like that. And their local medicine that has worked for thousands of years doesn't work on some of the parasites that are present anymore. And so usually they come identifying a particular parasite, and I look at how the symptoms show up, and then I put herbs together based again on that pattern and the knowledge of the life cycle. Because if it's going to kill a parasite, it's got to have some level of toxicity. Otherwise, it's just pissing off the parasite. And so I'm not anti-parasitic cleanse. I just know what kind of a parasite, do your homework, blend the antiparasitics appropriate for whatever you see. Rather than one size fits all. And I'm going to say, you can walk in front of me if you need to get to the other side. Angeline, you can go that way. Yeah, don't worry about it. Sorry, slight pause. I know that was baffling her. So the reality is, digestive issues are a very common thing. Skin issues, breathing issues are really common things. But if you don't have common exposure to it, i.e. outdoor pets, you eat dirt, tick-borne diseases, mosquito-borne diseases, don't assume you have it, and also don't ignore the other possibilities. And I'm going to use an example. We had a really difficult case that came into student clinic a couple of days ago. And she'd been to every specialist, been to all the doctors, got all the blood work, and also contacted, she was from the islands, and talked to the herbalist there from her perspective, talked to an herbalist here. She had this horrible, painful, it was dissolving her fingernails. It was causing her fingers to swell and crack. It was literally, I looked at her, I was just like, that looks so bad. It was on both her hands and her feet. And she'd done all the parasite cleanses. She'd done more and more restrictive things and lots of killy things topically, internally. She was doing essential oils internally at that point, even though she knew that had some real negative effects to it. And I was thinking fungus, but it'd been biopsied and tested and it wasn't. So I was like, all right, just got to remove that from my brain. And I want to say after our student did like a 30-40 minute intake, I think I was in there for another 45 minutes and I was completely stumped. And I'm just asking questions after questions. And I was looking at what she did for a living, and she wore rubber gloves, or she wore gloves, I should say, as part of her job. And I was like, you don't have a latex allergy, do you? She's like, oh yeah, I have to use the nitrile, whatever they are, gloves. I can't touch latex. I was like, oh, yay, we solved it. I was like, are you familiar with latex foods? And so pretty much all the foods she was eating were high in latex. Figs, bananas, mangoes, kiwi fruits, all of these really, avocado, these are really healthy fruits and vegetables, full of latex. So for people who have a latex sensitivity, it causes horrible inflammation. And what looked like a horrible, in her case, fungal infection. To other people, it might have looked like a bacterial infection. And so if we look at every symptom as if it's a parasite, then, we're taking a very narrow view to things as opposed to, let's see what's going on. How can we explain this? What do the symptoms, and if we have blood work or poop work and things like that, what is the most likely thing to cause? And then take it from that approach rather than everything is a parasite. And yet that is what I see. Like, it's hilarious. I see it I'm on all the stupid Facebook groups and so forth. And whatever symptoms somebody puts up, everybody says parasite cleanse. Not everybody. There's always a couple people who say parasite cleanse. And so just know. Sometimes, in this case, that was really hard to come to that conclusion. That's not my starting point for issues. All right, I'm going to come back to those. I'm going to say, oh, it's 7 o'clock. We got an hour left, and I got to do my station identification. Yay. Herbal animal care class coming up in about a month, so sign up now. Oh, yeah, it's September 29th and 30th. All weekend long, and we'll learn about everything from acupressure to herbs to all kinds of other cool stuff, how to find the best foods and how to prevent all those itchy, scratchy bites, as well as some more serious autoimmune disorders and things like that. Also, if you don't know, I'm Bob Linde. I am an acupuncture physician and a registered herbalist from the American Herbalist Guild. I'm the owner of Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies, a multi-practitioner, multi-modality practice. That we have practitioners here 6 days a week. I'm also the creator of the Tradition School of Herbal Studies, where we teach Western and Chinese herbal medicine, everywhere from beginner to practitioner, plus lots of cool things like this, as well as anatomy and physiology for the herbalist, taught by Trisha, and a bunch of Thursday night classes that are open to anybody, and some of our other things like the herbal animal care, the Understanding Blood Work series, and the weekend intensive on physical exam. There we go. Are all available for everybody. I've also got the podcast, Mastering Herbalism with Bob Linde. You can also find me. I'm going to be teaching at the American Herbalist Guild Conference this coming October in Black Mountain in North Carolina, which I'm super excited about. And you can find out more about the clinical practice if you want to see some of our practitioners. And some of the practitioners here do online consults for anybody. But AcuHerbals, AcuHerbals.com, AcuHerbals.com, and the school you can find out more at traditionsherbschool.com. We've also got a YouTube page where I babble on incoherently for hours, just like this. I have some shorter things too, talking about some of our cool tropical plants in particular, but also all of the recordings from the last couple of years about the open forum are there if you're really bored and have nothing better to do with your time. And if you're in the area tomorrow, plant sale from 10 to 3 here. We got all kinds of cool stuff. We're trying to clear out some of our inventory and not have to pot things up and all that kind of cool stuff. All medicinal plants, some edible plants, but they're medicine too. And then if you're in the Tampa Bay area, you can join us at the local chapter of the American Herbalist Guild. We're going to be going to visit Dragon Rise's acupuncture school that's in Bradenton, Sarasota area, do a tour of the herb garden, do a little herb walk. That'll be from 6 to 8 tomorrow. And then they're going to give us a tour of their apothecary and all the cool stuff that they have there. All right, back to Parasites or Autoimmune or one of those. And I will say probably my favorite herb to use for things like pinworms, because I would say that's probably the single most, and it's not limited to pinworms, but it's what it's specific for. Is the epazote, E-P-A-Z-O-T-E. There we go. It's grows here in Florida, so the price is right. It is a digestive herb, so it's very common.